Welcome to the deep dive. You know that feeling when you meet someone and there's just this instant pull, like you immediately want to get closer, find out more about them?
Oh, yeah, definitely. That's interpersonal attraction.
And it's what we're digging into today. It's kind of amazing how fast we make those calls, isn't it? Like snap judgment.
And it really is. And our mission here is to unpack that, to
Yeah.
explore the big things that shape who we're drawn to based on, the research out there.
Okay. So at its core, it seems like it boils down to something pretty basic.
Huh.
We like people whose presence feels rewarding.
Exactly. Rewarding. That could be obvious things like they make you laugh or they're kind, direct rewards.
Right.
But it can also be more subtle, indirect benefits. Like maybe they just make you feel good about yourself or you feel understood.
Makes sense.
And building on that reward idea is something called instrumentality. It's a bit more of a modern take, maybe.
Instrumentality, what's that?
It's basically the idea that we're attracted to people who can help us get what we want right now, our goals.
Oh, okay. So, like, if I'm focused on my career, I might be drawn to someone who seems ambitious or well-connected.
Precisely. But if your goal shifts, maybe you're thinking about settling down, then what you find attractive might change too. Your instruments change, so to speak. It's dynamic.
Interesting. Okay, so let's get into the specific factors. The first one seems almost too obvious, but apparently it's huge. Proximity, just being near someone.
Absolutely huge. We tend to like the people who are physically close to us. It sounds simple, but the effect is incredibly strong.
Like, if they're just there, in our space.
Pretty much. Think about your daily life. Who do you actually interact with? Neighbors, colleagues, people in your classes. They're the ones you can interact with because they're nearby.
Right, opportunity.
Exactly. Physical nearness creates the opportunity. And those little interactions, they build up. Even tiny distances can make a surprisingly big difference.
It's funny you say that. I definitely remember becoming friends with people in college just because our dorm rooms were on the same floor or we sat near each other in a big lecture hall.
That's a perfect example, and research totally backs that up. There was a classic classroom study.
Yeah.
Students were way more likely to become friends with the person sitting right next to them compared to someone just, like, 2 seats away.
Just 2 seats. Wow.
Yeah. It's like that little bit of extra space is a barrier. Closer in space, closer in connection, maybe.
Sounds like it.
And get this, there was this really famous study at an MIT housing complex back in the day. Students were assigned reams, totally randomly.
Okay.
And what they found was a super clear link between physical distance and friendship. People whose front doors were closest were most likely to be friends.
Makes sense.
But the numbers were stark. Like if you lived 1 door away, you were much more likely to be friends than if you lived 2 doors away, 4 doors away.
Yeah.
Even less likely it dropped off fast.
So literally counting the doors between people mattered.
Literally. And it wasn't just doors. It was also about which building you were in. People in buildings closer together formed more friendships between buildings than those in buildings farther apart. It really shows how our physical environment just steers our social lives.
Yeah, it's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. We don't usually choose where we live or work based on who we might become friends with, but it has this huge impact.
Exactly. And it's not just friendships. Another older study looked at marriage licenses in Philadelphia.
Okay, what did they find?
A really high percentage of the couples applying for licenses live super close to each other before getting married, like within a mile.
Within a mile. That's close.
Yeah. And a surprising number actually lived in the same building.
No way.
Yes. So the choices we make, where we live, where we work, where we study, they dramatically shape our pool of potential partners and friends, often without us even realizing it.
Okay, so proximity puts us near people. But then there's the next step, right? Familiarity, just seeing the same faces over and over.
Exactly. Proximity often leads directly to familiarity through repeated contact.
You know the saying, familiarity breeds contempt. Is that true?
Well, that's the common wisdom, but actually most of the research suggests the opposite. Usually, repeated exposure to someone, even if you don't really interact, increases how much you like them.
Really? Even if you don't talk?
Yeah, it's called the mere exposure effect.
Yeah.
Just seeing someone regularly can make them seem more likable. It's like our brains find familiar things easier to process, maybe more pleasant.
So that person I see at the coffee shop every morning, I might start feeling warmer towards them just because they're always there.
That's the idea. There was this clever study. Researchers had women pretend to be students and attend a college class a different number of times. Some went 15 times, some 10, some 5, some not at all. They didn't talk to anyone.
Okay.
At the end of the semester, the actual students were shown pictures of these women, And guess what? The more often a woman had attended the class, the more the students liked her, just based on seeing her around.
Wow. So just being visible makes a difference.
A big difference. And it's not just passive viewing. Another study looked at university emails, back when that was the main way students quickly connected.
Right.
Students who were in the same class together were way, way more likely to email each other than students who weren't. And again, even within the class, proximity mattered. Those sitting closer were more likely to connect via email. Small distances again.
But surely there's a limit. Like, what if the person you keep seeing is just really annoying? Seeing them more isn't going to make you like them, right?
You're absolutely right. Mere exposure doesn't work if the exposure is negative. If you find someone obnoxious or their habits drive you crazy, seeing them more often will likely just decrease your liking.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah, familiarity can amplify whatever feeling is already there. Think about annoying neighbors. Research in condo complexes found that people's friends often lived nearby, but so did their enemies.
Huh. Okay, so proximity cuts both ways.
It definitely can. Frequent contact gives you more chances for things to go right, but also more chances for things to go wrong.
And this idea of familiarity, it gets complicated with online dating, doesn't it? When you meet someone online first.
Oh, definitely. Online, people usually present, the best version of themselves, carefully chosen pictures highlighting positive traits.
The curated self.
Exactly. So you build up this familiarity, this connection, based on that online persona. But then you meet in person, and, well, reality might not quite match up.
Yeah, I've heard stories like people aren't as tall, or maybe they exaggerated their job or income, or they're older than their profile said.
All of those are common discrepancies. Height, wealth, weight, age, things that are easier to fudge online. So that first in-person meeting can sometimes be a bit of a letdown if the gap is too big. The initial attraction might dip.
It's like the online familiarity sets an expectation that reality might not meet.
Precisely. And proximity, or the lack of it, also causes issues with long-distance relationships when people reunite.
So, isn't getting back together the goal?
It is, but the transition can be surprisingly tough. When you're apart, you might idealize the relationship, focus on the good stuff. Absence can make the heart grow fonder sometimes.
Yeah.
But then you're back together, living in close proximity again. And suddenly you've lost some of that autonomy you got used to. You have to renegotiate everything, chores, schedules, how you spend your time. You might notice annoying habits you'd forgotten about.
Yeah, the day-to-day realities kick in.
Right. And that adjustment period can be really stressful. Sadly, studies show a pretty significant number of long-distance couples break up within a few months of getting back together.
Wow. So getting closer physically can actually be the hardest part sometimes.
It can be a major hurdle, yeah. Now, speaking of distance, let's talk about digital distance, or maybe digital proximity. The whole online dating world.
Right. It's completely changed the game, hasn't it? Apps, websites, social media. Potential partners feel like they're everywhere.
Absolutely. It offers incredible accessibility. For a lot of people now, especially younger folks, online is the main way they meet partners. More straight couples meet online now than through friends or work.
Really? More than through friends?
Nope. And for LGBTQ+ couples, the rates are even higher. Plus, there's a niche site for almost anything you can imagine, right? Specific religions, hobbies, lifestyles.
Yeah, and the variety is kind of staggering. But does all that choice actually lead to better outcomes? I feel like I hear a lot of frustration about online dating, too.
You definitely do. Despite the seemingly endless pool, it can be tough. One big issue is that ambiguous rejection. You swipe right, send a message, and then crickets. You don't know if they saw it, didn't like it, or just weren't active. It's disheartening.
Yeah, that ghosting or just silence.
Exactly. And the sheer number of profiles can be misleading. Not all of them are active users. Some might even be fake. So the pool isn't always as big or vibrant as it looks. Plus, even when people match, the conversion rate to actually meeting in person, let alone forming a real connection or even just hooking up, can be surprisingly low, according to some studies.
So lots of looking, not always a lot of actual meeting.
That can be the experience for many. And the abundance of choice itself might be a problem.
How so? Isn't choice good?
Up to a point. But when you have hundreds, thousands of profiles to scroll through, you might get overwhelmed. You start focusing on really superficial things, a couple of photos, a witty line, instead of looking for deeper compatibility.
The paradox of choice.
Exactly. It can make people pickier, always wondering if someone better is just one more swipe away. It potentially makes it harder to commit to getting to know any one person.
And what about those algorithms that claim they can find your perfect match?
Yeah, The research suggests that's pretty unlikely. Human compatibility is just so complex, so nuanced. It's really hard for an algorithm to predict real-world chemistry or long-term success before two people actually interact.
So buyer beware on those promises of a soulmate algorithm.
Pretty much. But despite all these challenges, technology has fundamentally changed things. It gives access to way more people than we'd meet offline, and it's super common now to do that online recon, chat for a while, before ever meeting face-to-face.
True. It's become a standard part of the process for many. Okay, let's circle back to physical proximity again. Why else is it so powerful? Convenience seems like a big part of it.
Definitely, it's just easier. Being near someone makes the rewards of the relationship more accessible and less costly.
Costly how?
In terms of time, money, effort, think about it. Grabbing coffee with someone across town versus someone 3 states away, huge difference in logistics.
Right. Spontaneity is much harder long distance.
Exactly. And while video calls are great, they don't fully replace being physically present, sharing experiences in the same space. Nearby partners just more convenient, and that convenience is itself rewarding.
Yeah, that makes sense. It takes effort to maintain a long distance thing.
A lot of effort. And sometimes, couples who had a really good thing going when they lived close by underestimate how much that convenience mattered. They think their bond is strong enough to overcome the distance.
But the day-to-day friction of being apart takes a toll.
It can. The lack of easy, everyday connection can slowly erode things. Again, committed long-distance relationships can work, absolutely. But for others, the sheer inconvenience dooms them.
So proximity isn't just about meeting people, it's about making it easier to build and maintain the relationship.
Exactly. It increases the odds of meeting, interacting, and research shows that generally, the more strangers interact in those initial stages, the more they tend to like each other.
Assuming the interactions aren't awful.
Right, assuming they're reasonably pleasant. Of course, too much contact without enough reward can lead to boredom, but initially, interaction often breeds liking. Proximity just makes those interactions much more likely.
Okay, so proximity, familiarity, convenience. They get us in the same room, talking. But then what? That first visual impression, physical attractiveness, that has to play a huge role, right?
Undeniably. We might wish it weren't so, or say we shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but physical attractiveness has a massive impact on first impressions.
And we tend to link it with other good things.
We do. There's a strong bias, often called the "what is beautiful is good" stereotype. We unconsciously assume that good-looking people are also more likable, more interesting, more sociable, more successful, just generally better.
Wow. So we just fill in the blanks with positive traits.
Pretty much. Especially if the attractive person is from our own ethnic background, we might assume they're also more agreeable, outgoing, conscientious. It happens almost automatically, often within seconds of seeing someone.
That seems like a massive advantage in life. Does it play out in real-world situations?
It really seems to. There's one small caveat. Sometimes attractive people are stereotyped as maybe being more promiscuous. But generally, the bias is positive in the workplace. Attractive people tend to earn more, get promoted faster. Academia. Attractive professors get better teaching evaluations. Students might even attend their classes more. Politics. Good-looking candidates are often judged as more competent.
Even in politics.
Yep, and even in the legal system. Studies have found that attractive defendants convicted of minor offenses sometimes receive lighter fines or sentences.
That's kind of disturbing, actually.
It is. It shows how deep this bias runs. Which leads to the next question. Okay, if beauty is so powerful, do we all even agree on what is beautiful? Or is it purely subjective?
Right. Is beauty just in the eye of the beholder?
Well, individual taste definitely exists.
Yeah.
But surprisingly, there's a lot of agreement. People from different cultures, different ethnic backgrounds, tend to rate the attractiveness of faces quite similarly.
Across cultures, let's say.
And even more striking studies with newborn babies show they prefer to look at faces that adults also rate as attractive.
Babies. How do they even test that?
By tracking where they look and for how long, they spend more time looking at the faces deemed attractive by adults.
That suggests there's something innate, doesn't it? Hardwired.
It certainly points in that direction.
Yeah.
So if there's this consensus, what features are we talking about?
Yeah, what makes a face attractive, generally speaking?
For women, there's often an appeal to features that look somewhat baby-faced, large eyes, small nose, small chin, full lips. These signal youth and femininity.
Okay.
But what's often seen as most beautiful is a blend of those youthful features with signs of maturity, like prominent cheekbones, narrower cheeks, a broad smile, and long eyelashes seem universally appealing.
Interesting mix. What about attractive male faces? Is it similar?
It's maybe a bit more complex for men. Strong, traditionally masculine features like a strong jaw, broad forehead are often seen as handsome, signaling strength or dominance.
Right.
But other studies show that faces digitally altered to look slightly more feminine or baby-faced, suggesting warmth and friendliness, can also be rated as highly attractive.
So both rugged and softer features can be attractive in men.
Seems so. And get this, a woman's preference might even shift slightly depending on her menstrual cycle or relationship status. Like, single women at certain points in their cycle might prefer more masculine faces, while partnered women might lean towards more feminized ones sometimes.
Whoa. Hormones influencing taste that specifically.
The research suggests it, yeah. Another fascinating aspect is averageness.
Averageness, like looking average.
Sort of. If you take a bunch of individual faces and digitally merge them using computer software, the resulting composite average face is usually rated as more attractive than most of the original faces.
Why would average be more attractive?
These average faces tend to be very proportional, very symmetrical. Nothing is too big, too small, too out of place. And symmetry itself, where the left and right sides of the face are mirror images, is also a key component of attractiveness.
Okay, so balance and proportion.
Exactly. Beautiful faces often combine that averageness with high symmetry. It creates a sense of harmony that we find appealing. If you're curious, you can actually search for things like the Beauty Check homepage online and see some of these composite images.
Cool, I may do that. So that's faces. What about bodies? Are there similar universal preferences for body shapes?
There seem to be, yeah. For women, the big one is the waist-to-hip ratio, or WHR.
The hourglass figure?
Pretty much. A waist that's significantly narrower than the hips specifically, a ratio around 0.7, where the waist circumference is 70% of the hip circumference, is consistently rated as highly attractive by men across many cultures.
Even in different cultures?
Yes, it's a surprisingly robust finding. They've even tested it with blind men using touch, and they show the same preference. You even see it reflected in animation. Think Disney princesses often having that low WHR.
Huh. What about overall weight?
Generally, being overweight is seen as less attractive. But interestingly, being a normal, healthy weight is usually rated just as attractive as being very thin. So it's not necessarily about being skinny, it's more about that ratio.
And breast size? Does that matter as much?
It seems to matter less than the WHR. Medium-sized breasts are generally found appealing, but the waist-to-hip ratio seems to be a more dominant factor in overall body attractiveness judgments for women. When men glance at a woman's body, their eyes tend to go to the breasts and waist area first.
Okay, clear picture for women. What about attractive male bodies?
For men, it's typically a waist that's slightly narrower than the hips, a WHR around 0.9. Broad shoulders are also key, creating that V shape. Muscles are generally seen as attractive too. A higher shoulder-to-hip ratio is linked to more partners.
So V-shaped muscles. Got it.
But there's a caveat here. Sometimes the attractiveness of a man's body shape is tied to perceptions of his resources. A muscular guy might not be seen as quite as attractive if he's perceived as being poor, for example.
Ah, so that provider potential links back in again.
It seems to, sometimes. Height is another factor.
Taller is better for men.
Generally, yes. In straight couples, there's a strong preference for the man to be taller than the woman. And height seems more important to women evaluating men than vice versa. Taller men get more interest online.
But you mentioned trade-offs earlier.
Right. Like, one study found a shorter man might get just as many online dating responses as a much taller man, but only if he earned significantly more money.
Okay, the height-income trade-off. Fascinating. What about other senses? Does smell play a role?
It definitely does, often subconsciously. Women seem particularly attuned to it. Studies suggest women prefer the scent of men who eat healthy diets, lots of fruits and veggies.
Really? Diet affects scent attractiveness.
Apparently so. And men tend to prefer the natural scent of women they find visually attractive. They do these T-shirt studies where people wear a shirt overnight and then others rate the smell.
Right.
And these studies find that more symmetrical, attractive people are often rated as smelling better. There's even some research suggesting straight men aren't as drawn to the scent of gay men.
Wow. Smell is doing a lot of work behind the scenes. What about something non-physical, like intelligence? Is being smart attractive?
It certainly can be, especially for women evaluating men. Women tend to rate men who demonstrate intelligence, maybe through conversation or test performance, as more appealing.
So that stereotype of men trying to sound smart to impress women.
Might have some basis in reality. Some research shows men even tend to use more complex vocabulary when talking to women they find attractive.
It's a really complex mix of factors then. Looks, body, height, smell, intelligence.
Absolutely. And the fact that many of these preferences show up across cultures, even in infants, really points towards an evolutionary perspective being relevant here.
Okay, let's dive into that. How does evolution explain why we find certain things attractive?
Well, the core idea is that these preferences might have evolved because they helped our ancestors choose mates who were healthy, fertile, and likely to produce successful offspring.
So beauty signals good genes or reproductive potential.
That's the hypothesis.
Hmm.
Think about the cross-cultural agreement on attractiveness or the infant preferences; those suggest it's not purely learned. Then there's the link between attractiveness, especially symmetry, and actual health markers or even intelligence.
Right. Symmetrical might mean less developmental disruption, better health.
Exactly. From an evolutionary standpoint, choosing a healthier, more robust mate would be advantageous. Same with fertility signals.
Like the waist to hip ratio.
Precisely. That zero point 0.7 WHR in women correlates with youth and not being currently pregnant, both strong indicators of fertility potential. The male zero point 0.9 WHR is linked to good health too. So preferring these ratios could be an evolved adaptation to favor reproductively viable partners.
And you mentioned that in places with more diseases, looks matter more.
Yeah, that's a fascinating finding. The idea is that where health is more precarious, clear skin and symmetrical features might be even stronger signals of underlying health and a good immune system. And ultimately, studies do show attractive people tend to have slightly higher reproductive success.
It's building a case. What about those cyclical changes in women's preferences you mentioned?
Those fit the evolutionary picture too. Around ovulation, when women are most fertile, their preferences seem to shift slightly towards features indicating good genes, maybe more masculine faces. They might also become more attuned to potential mates.
And men respond differently too.
Research suggests men might find women's scent, voice, even the way they move more attractive during that fertile window. Men might experience a testosterone boost from smelling an ovulating woman's scent. It's like these subtle biological signals operating below conscious awareness are nudging both sexes towards reproductive opportunities.
So it's like our preferences are echoes of what worked for our ancestors to pass on their genes.
That's the essence of the evolutionary perspective on beauty, yes. Preferences that favored fertile, healthy mates would have been adaptive, leading to these widespread standards we still see today.
But it can't all be evolution, right? Culture has to play a role too. You mentioned the Renaissance paintings.
Absolutely. Culture and environment are hugely important. Beauty standards aren't set in stone. Take body size preferences. In times or places where food is scarce, a heavier body type might be seen as attractive because it signals wealth, status, access to resources.
Like those fuller figures in older paintings.
Exactly. But when food becomes plentiful, like in many Western societies today, thinner bodies often become the ideal, perhaps associated with youth, health, or self-control. Media plays a huge role in shaping and transmitting these cultural ideals.
So economic conditions can shift what's considered beautiful.
They definitely seem to. And you see differences across ethnic groups, too, regarding acceptance of different body weights, for example. Different cultures might have different historical relationships with food scarcity or different ideals about health.
But you also said the waist-to-hip ratio preference seems pretty consistent.
Yes, that's the interesting thing. Even when ideal overall weight changes, that preference for the zero point 0.7 WHR in women often persists across cultures. It suggests a complex interplay. Nature and nurture both shape our judgments.
So it's a mix. Some potentially evolved preferences interacting with current cultural standards.
That's probably the best way to think about it. But even with cultural variation, there's still that remarkable level of global agreement on facial attractiveness, suggesting the biological roots are strong.
Okay, so looks matter, influenced by evolution and culture. How much do they really matter when it comes down to it, like when we're actually choosing someone?
In those initial moments, they matter a lot. That assessment of attractiveness is one of the very first things we do. Speed dating studies consistently show looks are often the single biggest predictor of whether someone says yes to seeing a person again.
More than personality or shared interests initially.
Often yes, in those very brief first encounters. People make incredibly fast judgments based heavily on appearance.
And we talked about men maybe emphasizing looks more than women.
Generally, yes. Men worldwide tend to report placing a higher value on a partner's physical attractiveness than women do. This pattern shows up in same-sex relationships, too. And remember that finding about men's marital satisfaction being linked to their wife's looks.
Right. Well, it wasn't the same for women.
Exactly. And that might relate to why the vast majority of cosmetic surgery patients are women. There's perhaps more societal pressure or perceived reward tied to female appearance.
But looks still matter to women too, right? Just maybe not quite as much.
Oh, absolutely. Attractiveness influences initial liking for both sexes. It's a factor for everyone, even if the weighting differs slightly on average.
Okay. So being attractive clearly has initial benefits. What about the day-to-day reality? Does being good-looking change how people interact with you?
It seems to. Interestingly, while men value female looks highly, a woman's attractiveness doesn't always perfectly predict how much time she actually spends interacting with men in social settings. Women across the attractiveness spectrum tend to interact with men.
Okay.
But for men, their looks seem to correlate more strongly with their social interactions. Less attractive men tend to have fewer interactions, and shorter ones, with women compared to more attractive men.
Huh. So looks might be more of a gatekeeper for men's social interactions with women.
It appears that way sometimes, yeah. In terms of general outcomes, attractive people tend to be more popular, less lonely. They often develop better social skills, maybe because they get more practice with positive interactions, and they even report being slightly happier.
More sex too, probably.
Research suggests, yes, more sexual opportunities. Some studies even estimate attractiveness accounts for a noticeable chunk of the variation in people's overall well-being.
So mostly advantages then. Are there downsides to being really attractive?
There definitely can be. Paradoxically, very attractive people sometimes have less stable marriages, higher divorce rates perhaps,
Why would that be?
maybe more temptation, more outside interest, disrupting things. It's complex. Also, attractive people report being lied to more often, people trying to impress them or get something from them.
Ah, leading to that mistrust you mentioned.
Exactly. They might become wary of compliments, wondering if they're sincere or just based on looks. Remember that study where they trusted praise more if the evaluator couldn't see them?
Yeah, they're aware of the bias.
They seem to be.
Okay.
So it's not all sunshine and roses. There are real social complexities and potential trust issues that can come with being highly attractive.
Okay, that paints a more balanced picture. Now let's talk about who we actually end up with. This idea of matching. If we pair up with people on our own level.
That's the general finding, yes. If you look at established couples, partners tend to be pretty similar in their level of physical attractiveness. They're in the same league, so to speak.
Even though people might aim higher initially, like on dating apps.
Right. People might swipe right on profiles way out of their league, but the serious, committed relationships tend to form between people who are more closely matched in attractiveness. It acts like a screening process based on mutual desirability.
So reality sets in eventually.
Seems like it. You need that mutual interest, that reciprocity. However, there's an interesting exception.
Oh, yeah.
Matching is less obvious in couples who were friends first for a while before becoming romantic.
Why would that be?
Because if you already have that deep connection, that shared history, that emotional intimacy, the relative physical attractiveness might just become less important when the relationship shifts. You already know and value the person for other reasons.
That makes a lot of sense. So liking someone's personality first can override the looks matching tendency.
It seems it can.
Yeah.
So while matching on looks is common, and big differences can sometimes be a barrier, it's not the only thing that matters, especially if other connections form first.
Okay. This leads perfectly into the next big factor. Reciprocity, liking those who like us back.
Absolutely fundamental. We are powerfully drawn to people who show they like us. Think about it. When you're sizing up a potential partner, you're probably weighing two things.
Yeah.
How attractive are they overall? And what's the chance they'll actually be interested in me?
Right, the desirability equation. Attractiveness times probability of acceptance.
Exactly. That probability of acceptance is crucial. Someone might become much more attractive in our eyes if we get signals they like us, even if they weren't our initial top pick based on looks alone.
And the reverse is true, too. We might shy away from someone stunning if we think there's zero chance.
For sure. We tend to calibrate our efforts based on perceived likelihood of success. This ties into the concept of mate value.
Our overall desirability as a partner.
Yeah. People with high mate value who are seen as very desirable by many can usually afford to be pickier. They have higher standards.
But if you overestimate your own mate value,
You might end up pursuing people who aren't interested, leading to frustration. Our expectations are also shaped by our past experiences, right? If you've faced a lot of rejection.
you might expect more rejection in the future and aim lower.
Exactly.
Yeah.
People who are shy or have lower self-esteem often anticipate rejection and might pursue less desirable partners to protect themselves. People are naturally cautious when they're unsure of acceptance. There was a study where people were choosing who to watch a movie with in adjacent cubicles.
Okay.
If they thought the other person might reject them, they behaved much more cautiously than if they felt acceptance was likely. Uncertainty makes us hesitant.
Makes sense. We prefer acceptance.
We really do. And interestingly, being selectively accepting is attractive.
Selectively.
Yeah, someone who isn't just interested in everyone but seems genuinely interested in you specifically, that's often more appealing than someone who seems desperate to date anyone. It's this selectively hard to get idea.
Yeah.
Not playing games, but being discerning.
So genuine focused interest is key. What about actually making that first move, those opening lines? Do cheesy pickup lines ever work?
Generally, no, especially not for men approaching women. Cute, flippant, or canned lines tend to fall flat or even backfire.
But it does work.
Simple, direct, and innocuous seems best. Just, hi, or I saw you across the room and wanted to say hello, or commenting on the situation. Honest and straightforward. Avoid anything overly sexual or jokey, usually.
What if women make the first move?
They have a bit more leeway, it seems. Men tend to respond positively, even to cute or flippant lines from women, but direct is still very effective for women, too.
So honesty and clarity are generally good bets.
Seems so. And at the end of the day, all else being equal, it's just really hard not to like someone who genuinely seems to like you. That acceptance is such a powerful reward.
Totally. Okay, another huge one. Similarity. Birds of a feather flock together. Is that cliche actually true?
Overwhelmingly, yes. When it comes to our attitudes, values, backgrounds, interests, similarity is a major force in attraction. We like people who are like us.
More than we like opposites.
Much more. Tons of classic research confirms this. Studies in boarding houses, simulated fallout shelters, setting people up on blind dates based on attitude surveys, they all point the same way. Similarity breeds liking.
Wow. So the cliche holds up. What kinds of similarity matter most?
Several kinds. First, demographic similarity: age, ethnicity, education level, religion, social class. Happy couples, close friends, they often match up on these basic demographic factors.
Okay, background stuff.
Then there's attitudes and values. This is a really big one. The more attitudes two people share or think they share, the more they like each other. It's a very strong linear relationship. More agreement equals more liking. No upper limit found, really.
So sharing views on politics, religion, life goals, that's crucial.
Very important for long-term compatibility, yes. What about personality? Do we need to have the same personality traits? Personality similarity is a bit more complex. It's less about having the exact same personality and more about both partners having generally positive traits.
Like being agreeable, conscientious.
Exactly. Emotionally stable. Your happiness in a relationship is often more tied to your partner having those good qualities than to them being a carbon copy of you. But if both people are agreeable and stable, they will be similar in those ways.
So positive traits often lead to similarity anyway.
Pretty much. The similarity link is generally stronger for attitudes than for personality traits. But people with similar styles, similar ways of interacting, they do tend to get along better. Even online, people prefer avatars that look similar to their own.
Huh. Okay. So if similarity is so powerful, what about opposites attract? Is that just totally wrong?
For the most part, yes, it's largely a myth when it comes to lasting, happy relationships. People aren't generally attracted to partners who are fundamentally different.
But it feels true sometimes, doesn't it? Why do we think opposites attract?
There are a few reasons why it might seem that way. One huge factor is perceived similarity versus actual similarity.
What we think we have in common matters more initially.
Exactly. When we first meet someone and feel a spark, we tend to assume they share our important attitudes and values. We project similarity onto them. That initial attraction might be fueled by this inaccurate perception. Even long-term couples often overestimate how similar they actually are.
So we see similarity even when it's not objectively there.
Often, yes. Another thing is that discovering deep dissimilarities takes time. You might be attracted based on looks or some superficial shared interests, and only later uncover major differences in values or life goals. The initial attraction was real, but based on incomplete information.
Ah, the slow reveal.
Right. There's a theory called stimulus value role theory. First, you're attracted by stimulus looks, surface stuff, then you explore values. Finally, you figure out role compatibility, how you function together day to day. Dissimilarities might only show up in those later stages.
Makes sense. What else?
Sometimes what looks like attraction to an opposite is actually a fatal attraction.
Fatal attraction. Sounds ominous.
It means a quality that initially attracted you becomes the very thing you dislike later on. Like, someone's spontaneity seems exciting at first, but later feels like irresponsibility. Or their confidence seems great, but turns into annoying arrogance.
So the quality itself didn't change, but how you experienced it did.
Exactly. It was a difference that seemed appealing initially, but wasn't actually compatible long term. Then there's the idea of being attracted to your ideal self.
Liking someone who has qualities you wish you had.
Right. Maybe you're reserved and you admire someone outgoing. It's not really about opposites, but about admiring desirable traits you lack. But usually you don't want someone vastly different or superior in ways that make you feel bad.
Okay.
Also, couples become more similar over time. They share experiences, influence each other, maybe consciously try to align their views, so differences can decrease.
Right. People grow together.
And some similarities just matter more. Agreeing on having kids or major life goals is more crucial than liking the same movies. A couple might seem opposite superficially, but be aligned on the big stuff.
Yeah, makes sense. Prioritizing.
Finally, there's that idea of trading assets we talked about, the looks for money type of matching. They look dissimilar on those specific traits, but might be matching on overall mate value.
The broader exchange, like the evolutionary idea of women trading youth beauty for men's status resources.
That's one interpretation, yeah. Men globally tend to prioritize youth and looks more. Women tend to prioritize status and resources more, though this is complex and debated. Some argue it's due to historical power imbalances. Others see it as more evolutionary. But you see these patterns in dating ads, online dating behavior. Men often seek younger, attractive women. Women often seek older, financially stable men.
So it looks like opposites, but it's a different kind of matching,
Potentially, yes. And the last piece is complementarity.
where differences fit together well.
Yes, like one person is dominant, the other submissive. Or one likes to plan, the other likes to go along. This can work, but usually only if the behaviors support shared goals and values. Like if both value warmth, one expressing it and the other receiving it gratefully is complementary. But truly opposite behaviors driven by opposite values, like neat freak versus slob, are usually frustrating.
So most helpful complementarity is still rooted in similar goals.
Exactly. You need to be on the same team. So while differences can sometimes add spice or function well in limited ways, similarity is overwhelmingly the stronger predictor of attraction and relationship success. Opposites attracting is mostly wishful thinking or misunderstanding.
Okay, that really clears up the opposites myth. So pulling it all together,
Yeah.
what do men and women generally want? Are the lists really that different?
You know, despite the differences we've noted in emphasis on looks versus resources, the research strongly suggests that fundamentally men and women want very similar things in a partner.
Yeah. What are the big themes?
Globally, three main things emerge when people evaluate mates. First, warmth and loyalty being kind, trustworthy, supportive, understanding. Second, attractiveness and vitality being good-looking, healthy, energetic. And third, status and resources being financially secure, successful, having social standing.
Okay, warmth, looks, status. Makes sense. Does the priority change based on the relationship goal?
Big time. For short-term flings, both men and women lower their standards somewhat and put a much bigger emphasis on attractiveness and vitality. Looks matter more for casual encounters.
Okay. But for long-term, serious partners?
Priorities shift. Women, on average, tend to prioritize warmth, loyalty, and status resources over just attractiveness, vitality. They'd often prefer a kind, stable guy to a handsome but broke or unreliable one.
And men, long-term?
Men also prioritize warmth and loyalty very highly for long-term partners, but they tend to keep attractiveness, vitality ranked higher than status resources in a woman. They'd often prefer a kind, beautiful woman to a wealthy but maybe less kind or less attractive one.
So warmth is key for both. But then there's that slight divergence on looks versus resources for long-term.
Generally speaking, yes. But remember, everyone makes trade-offs. Often there's an initial screen, maybe a minimum level of attractiveness for men, a minimum level of stability resources for women, and then everyone prioritizes warmth, kindness, honesty, dependability.
And these patterns hold up for gay and lesbian couples too, and across cultures.
Largely, yes. The core desires seem pretty universal. And both sexes also share common deal breakers.
Things that are absolute no-goes.
Right, like being untrustworthy, being unhealthy, having poor hygiene. Interestingly, women and people with higher perceived mate value tend to have more deal breakers. They're pickier.
Gotcha. So while there are broad trends, there's still room for individual preferences.
Oh, absolutely. Everyone has their own crooks, and standards can change based on age, experience, current situation. But the big picture, both men and women are overwhelmingly looking for partners who are amiable, agreeable, loving, and kind. That desire for warmth and kindness seems to grow even stronger as people get older.
It really comes back to kindness and connection in the end, doesn't it?
It really seems to.
Okay, before we wrap up, let's quickly recap the main takeaways. Can you run through those key terms again?
Sure, rewards, those are the good things. Direct pleasures or indirect benefits we get from others. Instrumentality, that's how much someone helps us achieve our current goals. Proximity, just physical nearness. Mere exposure, liking someone more just from repeated contact. Waist-to-hip ratio, WHR. That body proportion linked to attractiveness, matching. How partners tend to have similar levels of attractiveness. Mate value, someone's overall desirability as a partner. Stimulus value role theory, the idea that attraction develops from stimulus looks to share values to role compatibility. Fatal attractions, when a quality that drew you in later drives you away. Complementarity, when differences between partners fit together well.
Perfect. And the main points from the chapter summary.
Okay, key points. Attraction is fundamentally about reward and instrumentality. Proximity is huge. It increases chances of meeting and interacting. And familiarity usually breeds liking, though proximity can also breed contempt if interactions are bad. Looks matter immensely for first impressions. There's surprising agreement on beauty standards, likely due to evolution and culture interacting. And being attractive has pros and cons. We tend to match up with partners of similar attractiveness. Reciprocity is critical. We like those who like us, and perceived acceptance drives pursuit. Similarity is powerful. We're drawn to those like us in background, attitudes, and somewhat in personality. Opposites generally don't attract long-term. That's mostly a myth based on various factors. Men and women want similar core things, warmth, loyalty, but may differ slightly in emphasis on looks versus resources, especially depending on relationship goals.
Great summary. And finally, based on all this, what are some practical suggestions for satisfaction?
All right, some takeaways for navigating relationships. Value proximity. Don't assume absence makes the heart grow fonder indefinitely. Long distance is hard. Be a little skeptical of dating sites promising perfect algorithmic matches. Human connection is more complex. Don't automatically assume beauty equals talent or kindness. Be aware of the bias. Focus on finding partners you agree with on the important stuff, core values, life goals, and maybe most importantly, prioritize warmth, kindness, and loyalty. Those qualities are strongly linked to lasting happiness.
Excellent advice. It really highlights that while attraction can start with simple things like being nearby or liking someone's smile, deeper, more satisfying connections are built on shared values, mutual liking, and genuine kindness.
Yeah, exactly. And hopefully this discussion gave you, our listeners, some food for thought about your own attractions and relationships. Maybe think about how these factors play out for you. Did anything we discussed resonate with your own experiences? Or maybe explain a past relationship? It's a fascinating part of the human experience.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive into interpersonal attraction. We'll catch you on the next one.